Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT ONE, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guest today is Beck Besecker, founder and CEO of Marxent. Marxent is the developer of 3D Cloud, a leading 3D content management platform for enterprise retailers and manufacturers. In this talk, we discuss the use of the 3D product visualization, AR and VR platform in enabling full sales cycle e-commerce for complex consumer offerings such as home renovation. We also explored the challenges related to 3D content, including large file sizes, complex matching between consumer needs and product lines in a new UI, and the evolution of sales processes. If you found these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you'd like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you. Beck, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, both because the technology is I think quite interesting to me, but also it's in a space, retail, which is a bit unfamiliar to me. I'm not completely unfamiliar, but you'll probably have to guide me through this a bit. But it looks, Beck, like this is a space that you've been in quite a bit. Actually, just looking at your CV, the first company that you set up here as actually founder and CEO. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you basically set this company up when you were maybe a senior in college, and then ended up selling it off a few years later. What was the backstory behind your entry into the retail tech space?
I was in grad school at Purdue. We had a pretty interesting project. So this is like circa 1995, and like big data and scanning and prospect management databases were just really starting to come on the scene. And so I ended up getting like a school project where I was helping scan donor giving histories into a big database so we could build a capital campaign, and got really interested in the idea of what effectively it turned out to be was sort of just, differentiated or targeted marketing, trying to figure out who to call on and why and what was their propensity to give. And at the same time, Amazon was starting up and pets.com, if people are old enough to remember that. And I kept thinking, man, there is all these retailers move online, and you have email and other, less expensive ways of distributing, sort of marketing or promotions, that the ability to use those marketing dollars more efficiently is really going to start to become a thing. And so we started this company, Copient, which was really initially targeted towards, I say we, my brother and I, the company was targeted towards online retailers, helping them look at customer either purchase behavior or surfing behavior, engagement behavior, and try to tailor incentives to them that would be more interesting to them and optimize marketing dollars. And then eventually, where we really took off was a lot of the offline retailers, particularly like grocery, drug, mass, people like Safeway and others, that they were having the same challenge trying to communicate to customers at the checkout. They were all sort of like 10 different offers. Buy one, get one free, spend $50, get $5 off. And so our cloud-based targeted marketing technology ended up integrating into the checkout. And so in a lot of ways, it was sort of like Google for the checkout, in the sense that you could look at previous or current purchase history and then serve up a targeted ad. And then eventually NCR, which is a big point of sale company, acquired the company in the mid 2000s.
Okay, interesting. So at checkout, they would know the name, or they'd either ask the person for their name, or based on a credit card, somehow they'd know their identity and then be able to give a targeted coupon based on that.
Yeah. Another way of sort of summarizing that company is, if you ever scan a loyalty card and get a really long receipt at checkout that looks like it's tracking all your behavior, we're the guys to blame. We invented that. So there you go.
Okay. Funny. Yeah, I've got a friend here so I'm sitting here in China, but I've got a friend who's building, I'd say, somewhat of a similar business. At least he talks about it in the same way as kind of the Google or the Amazon backend for offline retail. But interesting that you were doing this 20 years ago. And then after you sold that off, you became chief development officer for Catalina, and then you ended up setting up your. It looks like you're now actually running two companies, Magnetic Mobile and Marxent. But let's say the relevant one for our conversation today, Marxent, you set that up in 2011, and here we're looking at 3D cloud. And 2011, that sounds like a challenging product to build at the time. What was the first config? Maybe you can just share a little bit of the backstory, actually, why you set the company up. But then I'd love to understand kind of the first configuration and how the company evolved.
My brother Barry is his background is math, computer science, and so he's kind of the sort of the inventor in the on the team. And my background's more like finance and business development. And so this is 2011, and gaming obviously was it was already hot, and that was something he was into. And he kept sharing with me that the potential of 3D in other verticals. And so it was our background had always been like, how do you take something that needs a content management platform and bring it to market? And as we started sort of thinking about all the use cases for 3D and sort of non-gaming or non-entertainment categories, I thought, man, it's not too wild to think that, like, why in the heck do we need a picture on a product page? Like, why couldn't we have a fully articulated 3D model for every product that ever existed? And we thought, man, if that ever happens, it'd be a much better user engagement. There's probably other use cases that there's going to need to be a content management platform to make that happen. And so it was, we were definitely, nosebleed kind of early. Some good stuff came out of that as well, though. Of course, we're able to really focus on building a platform. And then the other use cases, things like augmented reality. We actually wrote the very first AR app for the App Store in November of 11. And it wasn't even called augmented reality at the time. We were calling it like holograms or something. And then we also built the very first VR application in the history of retail back in 2013, something like that. And so, we were really early, and probably there's good and bad that comes with that. I mean, if you can survive through it and, spend money wisely and sort of increment and work on the platform and get through product market fit and get into pilots and validate your thesis, it can put you in a good position. And that's ultimately, there were some tough years in there, but we've put ourselves in a position now where we're one of the leaders in this space, which is great.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it was an interesting journey. When did you first get, let's say, the mature solution, more or less as it exists today? When did that first come to market?
So we had done, and it's funny, I'm seeing a lot of it in market today, sort of people who are coming into the 3D and AR a little later, which is not to say it's a bad thing, but we tested like every single product category to try to figure out which one of these were like actually meaningful to users. I bet we did several hundred. Like, that's probably not an exaggeration, but we did handbags and shoes, and we did like an animated notebook thing for Target, and we did lots of beer cans and beer bottles. It became a lot of these, like, sort of scan the beer bottle, get a dancing character, or scan a calendar and get an advertisement. We did a big thing for Heineken in Vegas. We did a thing for the 75th anniversary of Batman. That was actually pretty fun. But they were all like these like marketing campaigns, so you did a bunch of development, launched the thing, hopefully got an impact, an advertising impact, and then you kind of moved on to the next thing. And so we use that as a way to kind of keep the company going and get revenue in, and also try to find, like, where was this thing really going to like make a meaningful and lasting impact. And then, I kind of blacked out all those years. We found our hook when we started working with a company called AZEK, which owns a company called TimberTech, which is a decking company. And we built an application for them. And it was, where you could sort of, this is like that fabricated composite deck material. And they had lots of different colors. That was part of their value proposition, different railing styles, different infills, different caps. And we helped them build a 3D configurator tool really designed for homeowners as a way to sort of get into the sales funnel and begin experimenting with design and look, and then ultimately reach out to like a contractor to get a project done. And on the user side, man, it worked. I mean, it was like, this was definitely some latent need. most of the time, these like configure price quote solutions were really targeted towards like B2B sales. And this was sort of a B to, more of a B2C type engagement. I'd like to think of it as like Expedia. In other words, like we used to have to call somebody to book an airline ticket, and then all of a sudden, Expedia came online and we could all do it ourselves. And how much time people look and compare and think and evaluate. And in a lot of ways, our business is the same thing. We're using 3D to help users get a head start on a project and think through options long before they ever talk to a sales rep or a contractor. And so it really worked from a user perspective, but there was something else that became obvious as well, which was the content didn't change very much. Like once we built that 3D catalog, the decking catalog, which took some work, several months to build, but once we built it, it was sort of incremental updates year over year, and so we could amortize the cost of the content creation over a long period of time. And then we were like, okay, we got a great B2C user experience where people are trying to get in the top of the funnel and evaluate opportunities, and we could create the catalog and not have to keep creating the catalog in perpetuity. And then we started looking around like, okay, what else looks like this? And obviously it was like decking and kitchens, bathroom, furniture, office furniture, closets. And so we've been just working our way down a list of categories that all have that sort of same characteristic, if you will.
Got you. Okay. So it's like complex consumer purchases where things need to be configured, and there's some finite way of configuring them so that you can kind of visualize this. We're just doing audio here, but can you maybe give a best effort to share the end customer experience here? So
I think I can. Yeah. So the easiest way to think about this, like imagine you and I went into like a big DIY shop, right? And we were going to get our kitchen done. And historically you'd have sort of a professional sitting behind a desk, and they've got kind of a computer with a big old monitor, and you're looking at the back of it. And while you're trying to describe to them like what you want, or you brought a bunch of pictures in, or maybe some pictures from Pinterest, and the designer is sitting there flipping through a 3-inch catalog, like looking for all the different elements that they can put in the scene to build your kitchen, right? That's like it could be a several hours, several trips, several week kind of process. And your ability to iterate is basically low to none, right? It's not like you're going to get 15 designs from that designer. So what we realized is there was a sentiment in the market that consumers couldn't use these tools. Like, okay, the design tool is too hard. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. Now, some of the incumbent design tools were kind of clunky, but like if you gave a user a good online experience, they could definitely drag and drop and place stuff in the scene. What was the problem was that they couldn't understand the catalog, not that they couldn't design. And because imagine you have this big 3-inch catalog, like, do you know if you need a 10-inch or a 24-inch or a 36-inch? It's like you don't even know what Legos you have to play with, so to speak. And so what we did is we said, okay, we started testing with consumers. And what we really found is that they actually didn't really want to work from a catalog. They wanted to work from the inspirational photo they brought in. And so what we built was this design from photo experience. And so you can go onto one of our apps, you can scroll through, you can do a bunch of filters. I want, green or white or blue cabinets. I want this kind of floor, this kind of paint. And then you get presented a whole list of different inspirational photos. You find the one or two you like, you tap on the photo, and then you just start dragging and dropping the objects out of the photo right into your individual personal floor plan. And so it's like color forms, or it's like if you can't draw, you can trace. And so you don't have to worry about all this catalog knowledge. You just take what you like, drop it in your scene, save it as your own project, edit it if you want to, and check out or ask to meet with a designer. So it's super easy, drag and drop. It's almost like, color by lines kind of experience.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've got a catalog of, let's say, 10,000 SKUs, but then based on the photo, that's just going to identify the 200 that are maybe, relevant to this particular design. And that becomes the Lego set that this person plays with. And if they want more, they put in, they basically select another photo, and that gives them a different set of things to play with. Is that kind of the dynamic here? The way that you said?
That's exactly right. I always like to say, it's like if you were going to buy a cocktail dress and you said, oh, I want it to be, and you started describing it. And you said, oh, I want it to be, black and knee length and off the shoulder and have like a, like a white frilly collar, and you type that search into Google, like you might get 8,000 or hundreds of thousands of photos, right? And so rather than try to use like a style quiz to sort of figure out what a customer wants, just show them a bunch of photos and let them pick it. So it's like you pick the exact dress you want and you make it fit on you. We're doing the same thing for kitchens. Pick the exact kitchen you want and make it fit in your space.
Gotcha. And just to understand kind of how the technology works, I guess right now you have the photos in your library and they've been tagged to the different SKUs. So I guess right now we're getting pretty good machine vision technology. So might be possible that somebody brings in a photo that they tear out of a magazine or take a picture from a friend's house or whatever that might be. You scan it, but then it's not tagged to the back end. But do you think, is it technically possible to start doing some matching using algorithms kind of in real time, or is that too challenging of a task to look at right now?
No, certainly possible. It's definitely where we're headed. The other part of where we're headed is, one of the interesting things about our platform is we can build the photos. Our designers in-house use our exact tool to create a space and then render it out as a high resolution image. And that becomes the inspirational content. And so most retail, you think like, hey, there's a lot of photos out there to choose from. And it's not really the case. We found is they don't have a lot of content that they can either publish or present. And so we're actually becoming kind of a publishing tool to create inspirational content. And then the other big advancement, which is, so historically, we've been allowing the user to kind of drag and drop out of the photo, kind of one object at a time or a couple objects at a time. We're now moving to full automation. So now I can build my floor plan and soon be able to scan my floor plan. And then I pick a photo and I say, build my room. And then it presents a whole bunch of, it says, okay, here's all the available permutations of that room. Here's like a galley kitchen. Here's an L kitchen. Here's a G-shaped kitchen. It gives you all the different options that got created. And you can just sit there and click and just go from kitchen to kitchen to kitchen to kitchen. I mean, just like you could do hundreds of kitchens in a few minutes that you could click through. And so now, instead of it becoming a design experience, it becomes more of like a browse through all the possible options experience. And this, of course, is based on a set of business rules and best practices and data. And so now think of all now you can really go through and explore all your different design options as opposed to kind of keep incrementing on one. And if you're like a designer, imagine it's like going to the eye doctor. You can go like, do you like this one? Or do you like this one? Do you like this one? Or do you like this one? And so it's kind of like, instead of having to sit there, design one over a week time, send it to somebody, get their feedback, you can narrow their interest much more quickly.
And I guess this is, this could be done on site, but I guess typically it's going to be done from the comfort of somebody's home. We've got we're a consultancy, right? So we've got a client who does kind of desktops and kitchen setups and so forth. So that's kind of their core business. And I know that they were looking into a solution that would allow the property developers to walk somebody through kind of an empty shell of an apartment or something that's being remodeled. And then, you basically look at the room as it is, and you can start to place things in the room. So you basically have the real world environment that somebody's trying to imagine, and you're kind of taking these virtual items and placing them there in this kind of AR setup, maybe just use an iPad or something. Is that something that you're looking at, that you either have live, or how do you integrate this kind of physical environment together with the digital catalog?
We do that using VR. And so one of the core tenets of our 3D cloud is you can think about a lot of it like a Salesforce CRM system, in the sense that, like, if you're a big enterprise retailer, you're not going to buy 9 different CRM systems, right? You're going to buy one CRM platform, probably in the cloud, maybe Salesforce, where you can have a single view of that customer across all of the relevant touch points and customer history. We're kind of doing the same thing for 3D, in the sense that, like, you may have a web-based browser experience where you allow home design for a consumer, or you may have a desktop experience that's done in retail that's tethered to VR for like a design associate or a store associate. or you may you want to use those same 3D assets in an augmented reality experience, or maybe you have like a product configurator that you want to do. And so we have about 7 or 8 different use cases in 3D, and they're kind of gradually growing. Like, oh, I want to do 3D for Google search, and I want to expose my 3D assets to the Google algorithm. So what we do is, our real core competency is the content management system. And then we feed the same 3D asset across all these channels and applications in sort of a much more sort of extensible and efficient way. And so they'll probably be, we've really focused on the home vertical because that's kind of like more obvious use case, and we've got real ROI there. But I mean, I can imagine lots and lots of other use cases and applications and partners that would want to take advantage of our infrastructure. So that's kind of how we're thinking going forward.
Yeah, it makes sense. I always like companies that focus on a vertical initially because it allows you to understand the customer a lot better, even if I think in this case also your technology could be quite horizontal, right, in terms of the different companies.
Yeah, it was funny you were mentioning like the early sort of thin days. We built this content management platform, the best we could without having a use case, and started looking around for all the people doing 3D apps, and there weren't any. And so we didn't have much of a choice. We had to go vertical, or we were going to starve to death. So, but you're right. I mean, you can't. There's no substitute for working directly with the client and understanding and hearing their problems, and of course there are parallels in other spaces that you can sort of begin to see.
Well, I'd like to go into the use cases, but before we get there, maybe we can understand the client a bit better. So, maybe just who are you working with at the customer side? Because this is a complex solution that's touching a lot of different parts of the business. So imagine there's different people that have an opinion on what they should look like. So who are you working with, and then what does a process look like? It also sounds like this is kind of a project-based initiation, and then it becomes maybe like a SaaS offering in the long term.
Yeah, our customers, it's interesting because it's actually sort of matured in the last couple of years. When we started, most of the interest we got was from people who were looking for very specific, a very application-centric kind of request, like, hey, we want to do an AR app or something like that, or we want to do a product configurator. From small companies and from big multi-$100 billion enterprise companies, it was very like test app centric. The smaller guys, like say, by small, it's not really small, but if you're a $1 billion or less sort of regional furniture retailer, you might have an e-commerce team of maybe 3 or 4 people and plus some outsourcing. And, and a small percentage of your sales overall will be online. For those customers, our typical client is kind of it's often that it's kind of the CEO or president or head of digital or CTO, but it's a small group, 3, 4, 5 people who have maybe head of merch. That's a very application kind of centric discussion still. They kind of trust us they don't want to see, how the sausage is made, so to speak. So all of our compression algorithms and converting files and multi-channel management and role management and security and privacy, like they wouldn't care about that. They just want the application to work. Then you go to the 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion, $100 billion kind of enterprise, retailers. That's a very different sale. And it used to start with the application, but now it definitely starts with the CMS. And so now it's like enterprise architecture, and they're thinking about, okay, I have 20 divisions. I work in 20 different countries. I got 10 different languages. I've got privacy, security, SOX SOX compliance, scalability, extensibility. And so that's like enterprise architecture, digital, IT, .com, merchandising. It very much is it would not be unusual for me to meet with like 20 or 30 stakeholders in a big enterprise company across pretty much every division. It's not unusual that they may have done a 3D project or two, and now they're trying to figure out, okay, how does this thing get managed and scaled over time? So they're looking to invest in a 3D content management platform the same way they'd invest in a CRM.
And then once the decision is made to build out the platform, who typically is going to be owning it in the long term? Who are going to be the day-to-day users?
The day-to-day users are, and it's becoming a role that's kind of new in retail. It's like they're hiring people that are in charge of 3D. The other name for that would be like product configuration tools or consumer facing configuration tools. And so that's actually kind of a new role that's kind of emerging to work across all the business units to make sure they're all getting served with the right solution. If it's not, that role has not been sort of born yet, so to speak, it's usually now finding its way into kind of IT as the sort of the central owner.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the business model, is that pretty much what it looks like? Kind of project based setup fee plus, and then ongoing SaaS model, or?
Looks a lot like Salesforce. That was kind of we really looked at Salesforce as sort of how they went to market. So there can be some dollars spent up front around the creation of 3D content, also the business rules. So remember that catalog I talked about, the kitchen catalog at the very beginning? How the things in the catalog attach together or don't attach is in the head of designers. And so one of the jobs we have to do when we set up a catalog is to embed behavioral data in the objects so they know how they interact. So for instance, we tell like one of those like a fan or a hob that goes above a stove that it has to at least be 52 centimeters above the stovetop in the UK to meet compliance standards. And if you try to put it at 36, it'll give you a red flag and it'll tell you where to move it for safety rules or protocols. And so that's what makes it possible for the user to actually design, is that we create smart Legos. So if the user tries to do something that doesn't match a business rule, it corrects them and helps them get to the right solution. So yes, there is, probably 8 to 12 weeks of, which includes creating the content, creating the business rules, setting up the application, merchandising the app, doing integrations, and then launching. So typical project timeline is probably 12 weeks, something like that. So it's not a year-long project, and we've got a pretty good sort of methodology, if you will, to get live quickly.
Yeah. No, it's a nice competitive barrier, right? Because it's not just the tech of how do you visualize things, but it's all the back end know-how of regulations in the UK versus France. And
nobody wants to do that twice. so when people when I hear criticism of like, it's you always get to think, well, why won't Apple or Google or Microsoft do the same thing? And I'm like, I can guarantee you those guys don't want to deal with kitchen business rules. The deeper and more complex, and of course we've built a bunch of tools to make it easier, but yeah, it makes it sticky and you become a long-term partner.
Great. Well, let's start looking at the use cases. I imagine these have been a couple boom years for you. I saw that you've raised a C round last year, but this is the type of technology that was very much in need when folks were locked down. What are there's probably some kind of 80-20 rule here, but what are the major use cases? And then we can get into the long tail or the more emerging cases.
So this has actually been kind of a discipline that's been emerging, or we're trying to really understand. And so if you're a major retailer and the odds are in the last 3 years, you move to virtual design services. It used to be you'd go into the store and you'd meet an associate and, you'd sit there at the counter. That's definitely going away. One, because those resources are expensive. They're hard to find. And two, because everybody's learning that it's just a much better experience being on a Zoom call with a prospect than having them to have to come to the store, right? And you also can reach a broader audience. And so one big compelling event or trend is this development of virtual design teams, step one. And then now you have to think about, well, how do you get consumers there if they're not kind of walking in the store? And so now lead generation is in demand. And so the way we think about the use cases is there are all these different ways a consumer might get into a big project. And these are $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 projects. These are not small projects, and they have a lot of value added sales you can do on top of them, installation services and so forth. And so imagine kind of, if you will, kind of a circle, right? And in the center of the circle is your design services team. And you got to find ways to get consumers engaged. And you might do something as simple as like how-to guides or before and after photos, or just some, customers are getting educated, and then maybe they fill out a 5-minute survey, and then they come into your come in as a lead. The odds are you might get a lot of those, but they're pretty low quality leads. Like they weren't very far down the funnel if they just submitted a 5-minute survey. I mean, some may be good, but on the whole, you get kind of high volume, low quality. But then you go kind of around the circle, like, okay, well, what if I gave you an estimator that you could spend 15 minutes on, and you could look at styles and costs and so forth, and then you might get fewer leads, but they're going to be higher quality as that person's kind of into the budgeting phase. And then you go continue around the circle and you go, well, what about a visualizer where people are picking styles and preferences and spend 30 minutes on it? Okay, now they're even further down the funnel. And then you look at something like a planner, which is sort of the crown jewel or the jewel in our crown, which is, okay, now I spent 3 hours, I built 4 different kitchens, I'm planning, I'm budgeting, I'm visualizing. Like if that lead comes in, it might be a lower volume, but those are the creme de la creme of leads. And those are the ones designers love to have because consumers have worked their way, a project could be 14 months in these kind of categories. And so they're much closer to buying. And so our job in terms of use cases is, okay, do you need helping a customer create that sort of ecosystem of all these tools that a user could use to get a lead, and then helping them go, okay, which one do I implement first and what kind of quality? And then you can get into fun things like lead scoring as well. Like, okay, it's a little slow right now. Maybe I'll take a lead that's, a 50 qualified. But if it's a high season, maybe I'll just focus on the 80s and above. And so there's this whole, sort of emerging space that's kind of around these 3D tools, which is all around sort of engaging and grading and scoring and optimizing lead gen. So that's a pretty exciting kind of maturation of the space in the last year or so.
Okay, interesting. And then what are the technology aspects that are pushing forward the use cases? So I imagine on the rendering side, there's kind of developments in terms of how lifelike you can make this, but what is pushing forward the ability for you to move into new use cases from the technical side?
The big one was rendering engines for browsers. And so, you have things like Epic and Unity, which are traditionally big game engine rendering software. And they were pretty heavy for browser-based experiences. In other words, you can't expect an average homeowner to have a giant graphics card, right? They're not going to be a hardcore gamer. And so really what's happened is there's new technologies like Babylon that are kind of like lighter browser-based rendering engines that don't require a lot of overhead and still give you some pretty solid quality. So that's probably been in the last couple of years, 3 years, that's probably been the biggest sort of unlock in the space. And then of course, have cloud rendering and pixel streaming and all the sort of emerging ways to sort of move all the processing away from your laptop.
Got it. And then there's this whole topic of AR, VR, and I guess that's obviously to some extent this is kind of AR, but I think the AR that people have in mind, which is this kind of really immersive experience, is something that we've all been waiting for 20 years now. How close do you think we are in these types of use cases? It sounds like you already have VR experiences, so I guess to some extent we're there. Where are we in terms of having an experience that really feels immersive and highly engaging?
So we rolled out VR to 150 stores at Macy's a couple of years ago. It's still installed there. We're in about 400 stores now total. And that was the first enterprise rollout of VR, I think, in the galaxy. So that we got a pretty good first look at like how people were going to engage. We did a lot early on where it was like you were in the headset and the designer was working on an iPad, sort of manipulating the scene. And there's definitely a demand for that. But we found out that like putting somebody in a headset in a retail environment, they have about a maximum of 1.5 2 minutes before they start to wonder about their surroundings. So VR as kind of like a real-time design experience where you stay in there for 20 or 30 minutes is not really practical. We're finding that VR is more of like a payoff experience. Like once you've gone through a design and maybe you mirror the design on a big screen and then you want to immerse the consumer in it and walk around the finished room, that's probably a much better use case of VR. And so that's the direction we're heading. AR is pretty interesting. The What we've learned in AR, it's a tremendous, tremendous tool for consumers who are trying to figure out fit. And so if we've done, I don't know, 3 billion, something like that, AR experiences. And it's all really big stuff. It's like bedroom furniture, dining furniture, sectionals, and sofas. It's become a sort of a proxy for measuring tape. And that's but we don't see a lot of demand for AR for things like, putting a lamp on a table or actually rugs are pretty popular. That's actually a good use case. But like, art and, decor, it's probably not worth the investment. And so AR we're learning is really kind of is it going to fit, kind of use case so far.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, this we redesigned our house recently, and it takes a lot of time to kind of figure this stuff out. So there's a very practical case there. You mentioned that you are, and maybe you're probably getting inquiries from companies in other industries. You're probably doing some exploration there. What are the other industries? I mean, I'm thinking automotive might be interesting here in terms of a lot. They're trying to move towards a lot more configuration. What are the big industries that you might be looking at over the next 5 years or so?
Automotive is probably, we've looked at it for sure, but the range of options that you can choose, it's not like you're changing where the wheels on a car go. And so the permutations of configuration are actually quite low. And it's probably something that kind of like an agency can do for a dealer that really doesn't fit our profile. We're much more into sort of much more complex business rules where there's a higher level of configuration. So we're starting to see some demand in sort of the industrial space, like space planning applications. We've had some demand on kind of remote, like if you're a retail and you bought 300 stores and you've got to visually merchandise them, but you don't want to travel, with maybe some collaboration tools. Most of our focus is kind of on, kind of working down the sort of obvious extensions of where we are today, kind of staying in the home vertical, however. So we might go to like, landscaping next as an example.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Okay, so looking at different aspects of the home vertical, and then I guess the simplest B2B extension would be looking at a retail environment, basically again as a building where you have furniture and different types of things that you need to arrange within a space, right?
Yeah, it's also hard to be good at every vertical, right? So, and we have quite a few categories within the vertical. And then Dan Gilbert, who owns Quicken Loans, which is Rocket Mortgage, the biggest lender in the U.S., is our largest investor, or one of our larger investors. And so we have a lot of reasons to kind of stay in and around the home category. We think there's some pretty interesting opportunities there.
Yeah, got it. How do the markets impact your business? So I guess we've gone through a big boom in terms of people moving out of the city into suburbs and so forth. Now prices are relatively high and interest rates are going up. And so maybe people move into a different mode. Maybe it's less switching houses, potentially more upgrading. But how important are these trends to you? Is this kind of background noise and you just work your way through it? Or do you find yourself reacting to these market shifts quite aggressively?
I was counting earlier last week. So I went through in running a business, went through 9/11, went through the housing crisis, the dot-com bubble before that, and then COVID. So that's 4 or 5. And then I'm not sure what we're calling this downturn right now, but so I've been through enough of them to, the first few, especially 9/11, I didn't know how to navigate through that. COVID, I was much more prepared, but my kind of personal experience observations about these sort of changes is if you, manage cash well, they can be really big opportunities. As investment slows, competitors are challenged. Like if you think of them as like, okay, how do I make this a growth opportunity? I think you can get through it pretty well. But I haven't run into a whole lot of people who've been contrarian. Most people are pretty sour right now, but if I look at the business and I listen to customers, if I didn't know what was going on outside the business, I'd feel like we're in great shape. So I still feel like there's quite a bit of demand, and I think we're probably benefiting from the fact that everybody's still thinking there's a big transition online in these. I mean, there's the percent of like home good projects that are sold online is maybe not even a percent, right? And so there's a big move that's going to happen. And so I think that's sort of, hopefully for us, that overtakes any sort of, short-term downturns.
Yeah, no, I imagine that's going to be the case here. That the senior management is now awake to the fact that this is changing, and it's might be a bumpy ride, right? But it's not moving backwards.
Yeah, we're also inexpensive, relatively speaking, so to speak. Like, hey, store traffic is slowing, demand is slowing. Where can I invest? Well, building a whole nother store is expensive, but I can improve my online experience. And you have, massive addressable markets you can reach with these tools. Relatively speaking, we're not like some big major capital investment. So this is a place where you can continue to invest without, even if things get tight.
Can you give us kind of a ballpark there? Are we talking like mid five figures a year for a medium-sized client, or what's the kind of the ballpark range?
Like an early level client might be, or like an early stage, and we kind of sell the 3D cloud, and then for each application there's like an incremental monthly fee. And so kind of an entry level client might be 30 to 50K a month, and a big client would be well north of 100K a month.
Kind of reasonable, as opposed to the tens of millions for a.
It's not like a $10 million SAP project.
Great. Yeah, really, really interesting business, and I think very well positioned for the future. Anything big on the horizon, or anything that we didn't touch on yet that you think is important for people to understand?
I think this we kind of hit on a little bit earlier, but this like auto room generation we call magic rooms, I think it's going to be. I'm really proud of like all the sort of infrastructure and platform and tooling and everything we've built to kind of make what we do possible. But we've really been searching for that sort of like moment of the consumer experience where like, okay, this is like a 10 times, it's 10 times better or more than what I was doing before. And when you actually play with the ability to auto generate rooms and flip through different options, when I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so much better than I haven't gone back and done it manually since. So we're pretty excited about this. We think it's going to be a pretty big deal.
So I got to ask you, I've been talking to a lot of people that have somehow pivoted their companies into the meta space. Maybe it's an easy way to raise money last year. But this type of auto generation seems like the type of thing where you could kind of spin this as an auto generator for metaverse environments, for example. And then I think there's a company that might not compete directly with you, but somehow is kind of indirectly, kind of in a similar space. And they've been trying to make this pivot. Is that something that you've talked at all to companies about kind of creating more? I guess you're already doing that a little bit, but in a very practical kind of project-based way. But is that something that you've had discussions around?
So our company was born in Dayton, Ohio. It's very Midwestern, where the highest compliment is you're down to earth. I mean, I lived through kind of the AR and the VR and the XR and the MR, like all the renamings of kind of this category. And I was very happy that we were starting to come out of the hype cycle on 3D, and it was becoming sort of a really thing you could really use to drive sales. So when the metaverse stuff came out, I did kind of roll my eyes like, oh my gosh, like we just renamed something that's existed for 20 years yet again. But there are probably some pretty interesting opportunities there. I think that my view on the metaverse is that the most important asset that's going to exist in the metaverse is the little portal between experiences, like whoever owns that little HTML link between experience A and experience B, and allows all the creators to kind of work together and connect their experiences. I think that's probably what's going to be. But I just can't see like big company sponsored advertising centric experiences as being the place where people are going to go. I think it's going to be creators who create really interesting spaces that take advantage of content from retailers and brands. I mean, so we definitely have an eye on it. we're not sort of betting the whole company on it, of course, right now.
Yeah, and the experiences I've tested a couple out, and they all feel a bit like this is interesting for 2 minutes, and then okay, I'm ready to go do something else. So
you know what I think of it as? I think of it as like whenever these things happen, the first thing we do is emulate what we've already experienced. That seems to kind of like the very first like online retail experiences, like they looked a lot like how you'd merchandise a store. And then of course they became much different over time. And like to me, it's like if I were going to go buy a car, I don't want to go to a virtual parking lot. It would be terrible. Like I don't like to go to the physical parking lot. So it's in that stage where we're all just sort of experimenting, but I'm sure somebody clever out there will come up with a great experience and we'll all get on board.
Yeah. There's enough money there, so something will come out of it. Yeah, great. Beck, anything else we should touch on here?
No, this is great. It's thrilled to have the opportunity, and we've got a great team, and just really appreciate the opportunity to get our message out. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. Listen, if anybody that's listening is interested in learning more, what's the best way? Is it for them to just go to your website and get in touch there?
Yep, they could go to 3dcloud.com, or they could email me at Beck, Beck at Marxent, Marxent.com.
Okay, excellent. We'll put those in the show notes. And Beck, thanks again for taking the time.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into another edition of the IoT Spotlight podcast. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you would like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you.